I was thinking about why I should tell you something about Austria. It's a small country, but I think there are some particularities which are interesting. First of all, in the interwar period, the Austrian Social Democrats were a very strong party, very influential, and they had developed their own kind of Marxism, the so-called Austro-Marxism. After 1945, we had a socialist party, which was led by the right wing of the socialists, and the left didn't play any big role in this period. Second, Austria has suffered from two fascist regimes. First the Austrian one, then the German one. Third, Austria is connected by history with some parts of the Soviet influential things after the Second World War, with Czechoslovakia, especially with Hungary. And the most important thing which happened after 1945 was the communist coup in Prague in 1948, and I will talk about that later. Fourth, Austria was occupied by four Allied forces, and the Soviet side was again engaged in that. And the interesting thing is that we are not talking about the Soviet influence, we have to talk about the Russian influence, because it was a Russian nationalistic policy which took place. So when we look at the story of the Austrian left after the Second World War, we have a period of strong activity during the first years after 1945 until 1948, when the left wing was crushed by the party leaders. And then we have a period where there haven't seemed to be something of interest. Nothing happened, you can say, at the surface at least. But there is a hidden history in this period. First, we have activities against the rests of Nazism, which were especially strong at the universities. Second, we have a re-exploration of Marxist theory in the 60s. Third, we have to talk about the solidarity with the Algerian resistance movement in the 50s. This is a thing which was not obvious in Austria, since until some years ago a friend of mine published a book about this solidarity movement with the Algerian revolution. I will talk about it at the end. Yeah, what happened between the 1920s, let's say, and the time after the Second World War? Some phenomena are very obvious. At the end of World War I, there was a revolutionary unrest sweeping over Central Europe. After the Second World War, something like, I call it a bureaucratic change occurred, a change from above, which was in Austria done by the regime of the big parties, and in the eastern parts of Europe it was done by the import of a revolution like the Russian one in Czechoslovakia and other countries. Austria was insofar a special case as in the interwar period the Social Democratic Party was in favor of a policy which I would call radical reformism after 1945, its policy was dominated by the party's right wing. Despite there had been a movement which was called the Revolutionary Socialists. I just called it RS, which is shorter. In 1945, however, the RS were just a tiny minority in the SPÖ, Socialist Party, and not every revolutionary socialist who survived was also a revolutionary in the narrow sense of the word. 12 years of fascism had destroyed the radical Austrian Left as a movement. This was, of course, mainly the result of the right terror, the terror of the Nazi regime, but it was also the outcome of what had happened in the Soviet Union in the 30s and 40s, which was well known in Austria after 45. In a version which maybe was a little bit affected by that what the Nazi regime had told the Austrian population about what happened in the Soviet Union. Nevertheless, the representatives of the RS and the Social Democrats, right-wing socialists, banded together at the end of the war, forming the Socialist Party with the specification Social Democrats and Revolutionary Socialists. This was an error because the socialist left had been crushed totally by the Nazi regime, and almost nothing had survived of it. This was a form of working together which was soon seen as a failure by the right-wing socialists because the others were a too small movement. What has happened between 1929, let's say, and 1945? The right-wing socialists had survived because they were doing nothing in the period after 1938, and most of the revolutionary socialists had not survived. So we can say everything which existed as socialism in Austria was that at the end of the war. Following Otto Bauer and other Marxist theorists of the interwar period, the left of 1945 started by distinguishing between political and social democracy. Political democracy was the bourgeois democracy, the political democracy, and the social democracy was the aim of the policy of the interwar period. In the 1930s, Otto Bauer had written down all this in his book, Between the Two World Wars. A very important book in which he had the vision of an integral socialism which should combine the democratic achievements of the workers' movement in the West and the revolutionary spirit of Bolshevism. Bauer's position implied necessarily the suggestion of a close going together of social democrats and communists. The group of the revolutionary socialists in 1945 was in favor of this idea. One of its prominent advocates during the first years after 1945 was Otto Leichter, a an important socialist intellectual and journalist of the 1920s and 30s. He was driven out of the country in the 30s and returned unwelcomed by the right wing of the Socialist Party leaders into Austria for a short period before he went back to the United States in 1948. This group was a rather small group. One of the leading persons of the left group, Hilde Krones, committed suicide in 1948, a mixture of personal and political reasons for that. Others, like Karl Marx, resignated and turned to the pragmatic side, or yielded to the pressure of the party leaders. Erwin Scharf, one of the most important men of the left side, happened to become one of the party secretaries in 1945, when it was not clear how deep the RS group were anchored in the party waters. He openly showed his oppositional ambitions from the beginning. He played a leading role in the attempt to organize a more formal opposition within the party. At the party convent in autumn 1947, the so-called resolution of the 44 was brought in. This event marked the highlight of the oppositional activities for a long, long time. Here the story begins, which in the end led to the split within this left group I was talking about. Erwin Scharf was disciplined by the party leaders, who banned him from holding speeches in the party assemblies. On the other hand, he was pushed by the communists to go ahead. After he had published a brochure, Ich darf nicht schweigen, I would translate it, I have to break my silence. In autumn 48, he was expelled from the SPÖ, from the Socialist Party, formed a left-wing party with communist help, the Socialist Workers' Party, which never succeeded to stand on its own feet until it finally was absorbed in the Communist Party in 1956. Why did the Scharf Party prove to be unsuccessful? First of all, it seems to be a fatal Austrian tradition that secessions from the Socialist Party never had a firm stand. This was the case in the interwar period, and it was the case after the Second World War. And as a third reason, the already mentioned political development in Eastern Europe. It affected not only the communists and the Scharf group, but also the socialist democratic left. I would call the social democratic left, in contrary to the left which was combined with the Otto Bauer ideas. Why did it not only affect those left-wing socialists who were in favor of Otto Bauer's Austro-Marxism, but also those which we might call the social democratic left? After the attempt to assemble the left forces in the SPÖ in 1947, a veritable tattoo against all left opponents of the party leaders set in. This marks a big difference between Austria and, let's say, countries like France and Italy, where this didn't play any important role. But Austria was, as I told you, very strongly interconnected with the Danube states, and this makes it understandable why in Austria things went different. There never existed an organized group or fraction of left-wing socialists during the first years after 1945. Rather, I would call it a conglomeration of left-wing individuals. But one can distinguish from the beginning these two different tendencies of the group of socialists. The group of the Social Democrats on the left-wing side was in favor of, I would say, intrinsic value of democracy as such, and underlined, in contrast to the orthodox Austro-Marxist left, that there could not be a transitional stage of socialism without democracy. In the following years, this evaluation was cemented by the abatement of the insurrections in Eastern Berlin and by the uprisings in Hungary and Poland in 1956, and of course by the invasion of the Warsaw Pact troops into Czechoslovakia in 1968. The main victim of this development was, to say it very shortly, the Social Democratic Left. I go further. Should I set them again? Yeah. In 1947, we had this uprising, this opposition group, which brought in the resolution of the 44. On the next party congress in 1948, there could be spent an outspoken, hostile and aggressive move against the orthodox left. No wonder, because Evanchov had published his brochure, Ich darf nicht schweigen, shortly before the party congress. In the end, the considerations about Eastern Europe led to giving up old Austro-Marxist positions by the majority of the left opposition, especially those ideas which had been articulated by the late Otto Bauer. In 1948, an opinion similar to Bauer would have been impossible. Even former RS polemicized against the orthodox socialist left and described its followers, I quote, as apostles of the slavery of the people's democracy. Now, the real important question at this time is if Evanchov was a communist agent, as he was described by the Socialist Party. I think it was just he was an impatient radical who had made his formative experience during the years as partisan in the Austro-Yugoslavian resistance movement. He was the born victim because he was a bureaucrat, and so he could be expelled very easily. In the years following this, the militant left-wing socialists were not allowed to participate in any movement against the Socialist Party, of course, and this didn't change until the years after 1968. But let us turn back to the 1960s. There was a generation, I wouldn't say conflict, different generations of left-wing activists. There was a generation of people who had grown up in the interwar period, were experienced, and were now leaders and supporters of these youth organizations, but they were 40, 50, 50 years old, And the next generation of young people came in the 1950s. The 1950s where people like Karl Blecher, the later Minister of the Interior, were active in the socialist youth organizations. The activists of the left in the 1940s were people who had, people much older than usually should be in the youth organization. 50, 60 years, of course, and the next generation came a little bit later. So what happened in the period after the 1940s? First of all, we can see a theory reception, a phase of studying certain classics of Marxism, of Rosa Luxemburg and Otto Bauer. The first brochure I got when I was in the youth organization was Rosa Luxemburg's booklet about the Russian Revolution. On the end, I really do it very shortly. In the end, I want to speak about the solidarity movement with the FLN, with the Algerian movement against the French. We didn't know very much about it since there was nothing in written form, at least not outside of the Communist Party. But what happened in the 50s was that the solidarity with the Algerian liberation movement was militant in this sense that it not only gave ideological support but also mobilized financial and it tried to poach off, this is the right word, members of the French Foreign Legion. You must not forget, 3/4 of these legionnaires came from German-speaking countries, from Austria, from Germany, and so on. And this was really a new sign of opposition in the Socialist Party too. During the 1960s, new movements came along with protests against the Shah regime in Austria and Germany, which were to a great extent led by the Iranian students. Here my own story sets in. 1967, the Vietnam movement started also in Austria, but it was not so radical and militant as in Germany. But at least it started and it set a new beginning, which was different from what we had before in the 40s and 50s. New movement of international solidarity, which had shown itself only in the anti-French activities of the 50s. Thank you.
Thank you.